Welcome to Holistic Health with Melissa, a podcast for women who are ready to stop living in survival mode and start truly healing. I'm Melissa, a holistic trauma and anxiety coach, and here we talk about all things holistic healing for trauma, anxiety, and the nervous system. We blend science, scripture, and somatic work to help you regulate your body, renew your mind, and reconnect with the peace God designed for you to live in. If you're craving real healing, freedom from symptoms, and joy that reaches your mind, body, and spirit, you're in the right place. I think this conversation, Christine, just really needs to be had. People need to feel seen, and they need to feel understood, and they need to feel like what they're going through is normal. And I think so much of our culture and society and our beliefs about ourselves, like when we go through hard times, like really makes us feel like we're the only ones going through it. Hi, friend. Do you feel like you've done all the things? You've tried the therapy, the pills, the diets, and nothing seems to work? You have a great life, but something is still missing. You don't feel energized, alive, or free, but you know that you are called for something more. Then I want you to join me for the 3-day Mind Body Healing Workshop, where we'll blend science, scripture, and somatic work to heal your mind, body, and spirit for real this time. You'll step into whole body restoration, finding joy, freedom from symptoms, and freedom from the chains of trauma that have been holding you back. I cannot wait to see you there. Go to holistichealthbymelissa.com to sign up. Your life will never be the same. Welcome, everybody, to Holistic Health with Melissa. I'm so excited that you are here. This conversation is going to be so deep. I just know it. And I'm really excited to talk about this topic because I don't think it's talked about enough. So I have the Reverend Christine Vaughan Davies with me today. She is an ordained Presbyterian minister, ACPE certified educator, seminary professor, and trained spiritual director. She runs the spiritual care department at the Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital. She lives with her family on a small farm in New Jersey and spends her time chasing chickens and chauffeuring her school-age children to all of their activities. And we are going to talk today about grief and spiritual distress, which I want to say excited, but that's not necessarily the right word. But I just think this conversation, Christine, just really needs to be had. People need to feel seen, and they need to feel understood, and they need to feel like what they're going through is normal. And I think so much of our culture and society and our beliefs about ourselves, like when we go through hard times, like really makes us feel like we're the only ones going through it. And so I'm just so happy to have you here and your willingness to have this really deep, I know you have deep conversations all the time, but thank you for being here, willing to have this deep conversation today.
Of course, I'm thrilled to be with you, and I agree. I don't think that we talk about some of these issues as much as we could, and it leaves people feeling isolated and without resources. And so I view it as part of my mission to normalize some of what people are going through, and I see it every day, and offer some strategies for healing.
I love that so much. Yeah, people, what I see over and over again is that exactly, seeing clients and women all the time feeling like they're the only ones going through it, and or they are thinking like they're overreacting, or this is too much, I shouldn't be behaving like this, it
Yeah, a
shouldn't
lot
be
of
so
negative
hard.
self-talk as well.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
see the same thing.
So I would love to just hear kind of a little bit of background. What's important to the story is what can we understand from your own journey, and how did you wind up here doing this type of work?
Sure. So, yeah, a hospital chaplain and spiritual director, those aren't jobs that you hear about often. Um, the quick version is I grew up in the Presbyterian church that my family attended. I really took to it, much to the bewilderment of my family. Like my sisters, not so much, but I really loved it. And I also really enjoyed the field of medicine and the science of that. And I thought, oh, the best way to live out a calling, or, I happen to believe in God, the best way to serve God is to help people. And I thought it was going to be doing that through medicine. And
Mm.
then it was my own health journey that led me as a patient in the hospital, going through some of that existential suffering, to say nothing of the physical component. And I got a little dismayed by the bedside manner of many of the healthcare workers taking care of me. And I had an opportunity to have dinner with the pastor at my church, and they just inquired about what it was like to be going through all of this and how it was impacting me emotionally and spiritually. And looking back, I was like, oh, that's what I want to spend my time doing with people, is really caring for them in that way. So that's what got me started on this path. I went to seminary, I went to grad school for social work as well, and am here today focusing on those areas of suffering.
Mm. Yeah, you said hospital chaplain and spiritual director are jobs you don't hear a whole lot about unless you need them, right?
Hmm.
And I think
Hmm.
some people, like my own experience, you might not know a whole lot of my story, but one of the worst things that's ever happened to me, worst experience, but maybe the best thing that ever, changed the course of my life, was my brother died. My older brother passed away. I was 18, he was 23. He passed away traumatically. He
Mm.
was in the hospital he was declared brain dead because of a brain injury, but it took some time for all that. And I'm sure you're familiar.
Yeah.
Like, we decided to donate his organs. That's not a quick process. Like,
Hmm.
um, but we got a ton of support from the hospital chaplain, among other people, obviously, but you don't really hear about hospital chaplain until you actually need it. So, what
Hmm.
exactly do you do as a hospital chaplain?
Yeah. So I appreciate you sharing your story, because that's another way that it normalizes it for people and the ways in which it impacted you. So a lot of the families I meet with are in similar scenarios. They might be in the intensive care unit of the hospital, and they may have been told that their loved one is nearing the end of their life, and they have difficult decisions that they have to make as a result of that. And so we're there to really facilitate those advanced care discussions. We do a lot of end of life and bereavement work. That is probably the number one thing we do. And then we have a little bit more routine work as well, where we are, meeting with people that maybe are in the hospital for, not a major reason, maybe a minor surgery. And still, hospitalizations can bring about a lot of distress. And so we're meeting with those individuals as well, to really provide an extra layer of emotional and spiritual support. And I think we're the only discipline in healthcare. I don't know that this is 100% accurate, but I think we're the only ones that care for the patients, the families, and the staff as well. So if I'm going to a code in the hospital, so someone's having a cardiac arrest or a respiratory event that might result in their death, I'm also checking in afterwards with the staff members to find out how they're impacted, and caring for them also.
Mm. That is such an under, I think, utilized or under, that's not the word, but we need so much more of that. As a
Mm.
nurse by trade, that's what I did. I worked in the ICU, in the pediatric ICU, in a level one trauma center for 7 years before I
Ooh.
changed my, started working in a different unit, stepped down and did some other things, before I opened my own practice. But when I was, it's so strange to be a staff member in a
Mhm.
situation where you have a patient code, and whether or not they die, it's still very traumatic. And I think that
Absolutely.
no matter how strong you think you say you are, like, that still impacts you. And I remember times where like my patients did die and like taking them to the morgue, and then you come back to the unit and your charge nurse is like, okay, you good?
Here's the next
We're
one.
getting an admit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
whoa,
Yeah.
can I have a second to breathe? Like my patient just died. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
a so I love that you I think more and more it's been a long time. It's been 10 years since I've worked in the hospital. So um I think more and more people are recognizing hospitals, nurse managers, nurses, staff, charge nurses are recognizing the need for that. So I love that you really do focus on that as well. Um, what do you see most commonly when, like how grief and loss affects a person? I know that's a big
Mm-hmm.
question, but
Yeah.
like, what would you say are some of the most common things that you see?
Yeah. So I want to let everyone know that I think we are all grieving something at any given moment in our lives. This is a somewhat controversial opinion, and you probably have some listeners saying, well, I'm not grieving anything right now. But we are all going through different losses during our daily lives. And because we're also going through changes, some of those changes are helpful, and we're getting a promotion, or we're buying a new house. Anytime there's any change in our lives, that brings about loss. And anytime there's loss, there's going to be grief there as well. So even if it's something happy and that we're looking forward to, like having a new baby, or moving to a town that you've always wanted to live in, there's still aspects where your identity is now changed. And you're not going to see the people that you used to see before. You're not going to have all the free time that you used to have before being a parent. So even in these moments where it is a really much anticipated and prayed for change, there's still going to be moments of loss and grief with it. And even more so when there is change that we are not wanting to happen to us and have no control over, such as a death, or getting fired from a job, or having a new diagnosis and not knowing how to move through that. So I deal a lot with death and end of life, but I'm also always looking for what other losses are going on for people, what other griefs are there. And I think that helps if we can kind of investigate in our lives. I like to say I'm sometimes like the loss detective. What losses are going on for you in the past 6 months to a year? And sometimes if we can call that a loss and say that there might be grief there, that's the first step in normalizing it. I sometimes hear from people like, I don't know why I'm feeling this way.
Mm.
But then if we go through, okay, tell me what's been happening in your world lately. And it turns out there's lots of reasons why they are in loss and grief, but they may not have had that name for it.
Mm. Gosh, I actually completely agree with you on that. You said somewhat controversial opinion. I don't think that's controversial at all. I think I totally agree. I say, I don't necessarily, deal specifically with loss and grief, but I do my specialty is trauma recovery, and there
Mm-hmm.
is obviously loss and grief wrapped up in that. And you can't really separate the two, but I say all the time, like people come to me often and say like, well, I don't have trauma, can you still help me? And
Oh.
it's like, ooh.
Well, and in social work school, we talked about little t trauma and big T trauma, right? That
Yeah.
all of that can exist. And the way that I think that that can sometimes intersect with loss is there's a specific type of loss called intrapsychic loss. And that is the loss that occurs when our life turns out differently than we
Mm,
thought it would. And for
mm,
some people, particularly if they're going through trauma, a big T trauma or a little T trauma, it's like, I never thought that this could happen to me. And this has kind of changed my whole worldview, or really pierced the veil of how I thought the world worked. And that can be, an earth-shattering experience for so many people, because it changes their meaning perspective and how they see the world around them.
Yeah, that's so good. Since you brought it up, I'm gonna take the time to say I actually hate the differentiation, big T trauma and little
Ah, okay. Well, you're
T
the
trauma.
expert in
Yeah.
trauma, so. Mhm.
Well, but only because I get it for helping people understand what trauma is. Like it's good
Mm.
as like an educational tool, but what I think it's done by and large over the last, 10, 15, 20 years that we've really been talking about trauma is I actually think it makes some people feel invalidated while like
Hmm.
glorifying the experience of other
I see.
people.
Yep,
When
I
you
can
say like,
understand
oh,
that.
well, like your little T traumas are like still traumas, people are like, well, I just have like a little T trauma.
Ah,
And I think that
mm-hmm.
actually perpetuates the cycle of people thinking,
Like
like, I
minimizing their
don't
own
have
pain.
trauma. And
Mm-hmm.
people say that to me about my story a lot. And that's why I actually
Mm-hmm.
speak about that specifically, like when I
Mm-hmm.
speak publicly. And because my story is full of lots of big T traumas. And it's very traumatic. My childhood was extremely traumatic and things no child should ever endure. But I have the response from people when they hear my story that they say, oh, well, my story is not as bad as your story. And I always
Yes.
like hate that.
Mm-hmm.
It like makes me
Mm-hmm.
so mad because I'm like, no, trauma
Yeah.
is trauma. Like this is not me versus you, or like your story is better or worse or
Right.
more,
I
like,
see that in my work too. I call it the suffering Olympics. Like
yeah,
we don't need to compare.
that's
Everyone is going through something. And sometimes I'll have patients that say like, "Oh yeah, I know there's people in the hospital here worse than me." And I'm like, "Doesn't matter. This is your story. Like this
yeah,
is your space to talk
yeah,
about what's going on with you."
yeah.
Is there an element where it can be a tool of resilience to have perspective? Absolutely. But that doesn't minimize, your experience.
Right. And when you minimize your experience, you're actually like doing the opposite of
Hmm.
like processing through it in a healthy way. If you're
Yeah,
minimizing it, you're like, oh, well, like, then you start getting into what we were saying at the beginning is like this negative self-talk,
right.
like loop, right? Where you'd be like, oh, well, like my trauma is not as bad as your trauma. So like I probably shouldn't feel this way. And like, why am I
Mm,
overreacting? And then it's like, and then you get into this loop
yeah.
of self negative self-talk or like
Mhm.
self-judgment and shame, and then that perpetuates more grief and loss.
Absolutely. It is so hard. And I think added to that, it makes me think of the myths that we have around grief and loss in our
Yeah.
society.
Yeah, tell
You
me.
know, people don't like to be feeling down, and uh, a lot of people will say really well-intentioned but harmful things to people who are in the midst of grieving. And a lot of what I do is try to teach and preach against that. So I've sat with patients or families that have been told, oh, this happened because God needed another angel, or everything happens for a reason, or, you just have to let go and let God, and things like this, these toxic religious platitudes that again, the person saying it is probably not realizing the amount of harm they are doing. But we're in a society where we're not talking about grief and loss a lot. And so we don't know how to respond in the moment when someone's going through crisis. And actually, that can do harm, because if I have just lost a child and someone is telling me, well, God wanted another angel and that's why your child died, I'm going to think, if I believe that person, I'm going to think, well, then God's a jerk. I have no interest in, entertaining, any sort of religion or spirituality. And I might internalize that belief. And then I wind up sitting with people in spiritual direction where we are untangling I would say, religious trauma. And sometimes it is, things that the institutions of religions have done, or sometimes it's things that people have said trying to help, but have made it worse for them.
Yeah. Um I love that you just brought that up too, because that was actually kind of like I was wondering, like, this is a faith-filled podcast. Like, I'm a Christian, like, obviously, like, we both love Jesus, but and that's such a, I mean, you can't separate it from your p position, like your job, right? But like, I was curious to know how you help people who come in who are very either hurt by religious institutions or religion in general, or who have never been religious, maybe don't even have an experience with religion or Jesus, or, we could go into that long conversation, like religion, but
Hmm.
we won't go there. We don't have that time. But I'm curious to know, like, if and how you're still able to help those people.
Hmm. Yeah. So what I do in both my work as a chaplain and my work as a spiritual director is I meet people where they are. Sometimes I walk into a patient's room, they're like, "Chaplain, no, I'm not religious." And I'm like, "I'm not the church police. That is not my role." And so I like to remind people that spirituality, the way I define it, is how we connect to ourselves, how we connect to others or our community, and then how we connect to the transcendent. For some, that's God or divinity. For some, it might be, nature. And for some people, religion helps them in those connections. For some people, religion helps them with some of those connections. And for some people, religion is completely outside of that. There's a theologian named Paul Tillich who talked about religion is whatever is your ultimate concern. And so when I'm meeting with people for the first time, what I'm interested in is what is your ultimate concern? What is it that you value or you hold deeply or weighs on your heart? I will say 90% of the time people talk about family. That is very intrinsic to their own spirituality. They may not have had the words to say that as such, but that is the all-encompassing thing for a lot of people. Others, it might be different. It might actually be their work. That's what's giving them meaning. It may be, I hear a lot from people, it's nature. It's being able to, be outside and enjoy their lives in that way.
Mm, so beautiful. When you just talked about the unintentional, like, comments being made from people with, good intentions, but are
Hmm.
saying something that's not helpful and sometimes damaging, how is the best way to respond to somebody who's going through an acute trauma or loss?
Mm-hmm. So I will say the best thing to do is show up and shut up. So to be there for that individual in whatever way makes sense, given the context of the situation, but to make your presence known and available. So it's showing up to the funeral, showing up to the bedside, sending texts saying, "I'm thinking of you," those types of things. Make your presence known, and the words don't matter. You can actually say less rather than saying more. It's really about communicating that you are there to be with that person that is going through this tremendous loss and grief. Sometimes people want more practical, like tactile, like what can I give them? What can I do? I do have an article I wrote with all of those things, a grieving gift guide, so to speak. But really, what I emphasize is trusting that knowing that that person is going through something hard and you are relaying to them that you are thinking about them is huge. My one other piece of advice, if someone's going through something, because a lot of times people will maybe text or call and say, "Let me know if you need anything." Which again is one of those things like, I've done that before. Like that is well-meaning. However, it then puts the onus on the person going through whatever the crisis is to respond and to say like, "Oh, I need this or this or this," and they have enough going on. And so what I try to tell people to do instead is to say, um, I'm going to the grocery store now. I'm going to pick up supplies for dinner, and I'm going to drop it off at your on your step. You don't even have to come outside, or I'm going to mow your lawn, or what. Or if there's something else I could do, let me know that. And sometimes those concrete things are helpful. And that person might say, no, we're good on food, we're good on the lawn, but could you take the dog for a walk? Or could you pick up my kids from school on Thursday? Something like that. I think is a tangible way to show the care. The other thing I recommend, especially around grief and end of life situations, is if someone close to you has suffered a death in their family, what I recommend is put it on your calendar 6 months from now and send a card or check in 6 months after the death. I'd also do it for a year because the anniversary can bring up a lot of pain. Because what happens around death is usually in the first, couple weeks, there is that initial flurry of outpouring. There's all the bereavement rituals to go through. But some of that support and attention kind of dies down by the time we get to the 3 month or the 6 month mark, and certainly by the year mark. And people are often given the impression that they're supposed to be moving on, so to speak. That's another myth. I don't think we ever move
Because
on.
everyone else has. Yeah.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
We're given 3 days bereavement leave from work, and then you're expected to be over it. No, we never move on from grief. We move through grief, we move with our grief, and it changes us. But we never get over it, which is, I think, something that our society expects, but isn't actually what happens.
Yeah. Those are such good tips. Such good tips. I think what you said earlier, like we don't really talk about it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's why it kind of those comments come like, let me know if you need anything, or like, and they, I think I would say by and large, like that's people mean well when they're like, let me
Mm-hmm.
know if you need anything, or yeah, God needed another angel. Like they're trying to provide comfort, but they don't
Mm-hmm.
realize that it's not helpful.
Yeah.
But that's because we don't talk about that. Like nobody
Right.
learns how to handle that. And so I love those tips that you just gave, because it gives people like actual, like a concept of like when you are going through grief, like deep loss, like if somebody says like, let me know what you need, you're like, I don't even know what I need right
Mm-hmm.
now, let alone like
Mm-hmm.
something to like then tell you how
Yes,
to help me. Like that's so much more pressure on that
absolutely.
person. And then they can't address their own emotions. They almost have to soothe your emotions
Mm-hmm.
because
Oh
like
my
you're
goodness.
you're
That's
uncomfortable,
We
right?
see
Like you're
this so often.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I love those are super, super powerful tips. And as somebody who's gone through a tremendous loss like that, I think that those are so important. And then something else that you said, like show up and shut up. Like less is more. More is
Mm-hmm.
not always more. Sometimes less is
Mm-hmm.
more.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Yep.
that's such an important piece, is just like being present,
Mm-hmm.
and especially when everybody else kind of falls away.
Yeah.
And
And even if you're not in the same, location geographically, even sending a text that says, there are no words. I'm thinking of you, holding you in prayer, holding you in light, however makes sense for your own belief system. And no need to respond to this text. That's the other thing, because there's often feeling like, oh, I have to respond to everything if people are reaching out. But something simple like that can go a long way.
yeah, it's just popped into my head. And I'm just curious your opinion.
Mhm.
Like, what about just like, whether you're in person or not, but like just saying, I'm so sorry.
Mm-hmm. I
Like,
think that's a fine thing to say. The only part that can make it difficult, I see this a lot at funerals actually, is because people say that like over and over, and it almost puts the griever in the spot where they have to be like, no, I know it's okay. He was he's not in any pain anymore. Like it almost puts the griever in the spot where they have to
yep,
care for
soothe
the
their emotions.
individual,
Yeah.
right? So that's the only piece where it can be difficult. That's where I would write. You could say, I'm sorry, and I'm thinking of you. Just making
Yeah.
sure that you're not needing that other person to then respond to that in that way.
Yeah.
But simple things like I love you and, I am thinking of you right now. The other thing that a lot of my grievers tell me that they appreciate is, even writing a card or sending a message or telling the person, maybe not in that exact moment. So maybe this is something that comes a little bit down the pike. Telling them a favorite memory that you have of their loved one, using their loved one's name. I have a
Such a
lot
big
of
one.
people that say, oh, I'm afraid to talk about this person that died. I don't want to bring it up for the family to make them more upset. I'm like, absolutely not. That person that is grieving is living with this reality every day and would likely be happy for a chance to be able to talk about their loved one when the rest of the world has moved on.
Yeah, I love that. That's so interesting that you said that because I actually had that conversation not too long ago. Somebody asked me, it's been over 20 years since my brother died, but his name was Justin, and
Mm.
somebody said like I was on a podcast actually, a guest on a podcast, and the podcast guest or host asked me, "Is it okay if I say his name?" And I was like, "Yes, like
Mm.
please say his name.
Mhm.
Like I
Mhm.
would love to say his name explicitly. I say like my brother, but like to say Justin, like is so
Mhm.
it just makes my heart happy,
Yeah.
you know?
And
Um,
to ask about him, I'll admit, like when you were telling me, like my initial reaction is to say, "Tell me about your brother," right? That's what I do with people to keep that memory alive and
yeah,
to give you an opportunity to talk about how important he was and the legacy that he has left in your life.
yeah,
But I also knew that we only had a certain amount of time and had other
yeah.
questions. But
Another time. Um, oh, so good. I have so many questions. Um, so I really want to talk specifically to like my specialty, my training is all in trauma recovery. And I think, like I already said, like so many people have, everybody has some sort of
Mhm.
trauma. And a lot of people have trauma that they haven't processed through.
Mhm.
And they don't even necessarily classify it as trauma. They don't
Mm.
really understand. And we know research tells us over and over that unprocessed trauma is like there's emotion associated with trauma, and emotion
Mhm.
is energy in motion. It's in our body, it stays in our
Mm.
body. And when you don't process that emotion, you don't process through that emotion, it stays there and it starts to create inflammation and ultimately, eventually, physical symptoms. And it will cause your body to respond.
Mm.
And so that's my specialty.
Mhm.
And so I want to talk specifically to that woman who has this unprocessed or underprocessed, improperly processed grief and loss.
Mm.
What do you recommend for those types of people who have it? Maybe it was
Mhm.
last week, maybe it was last year, maybe it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. Like, who knows?
Mhm.
And she's like, she knows who she is. And she's like, oh, yeah,
Mm.
that's definitely me. How does she start to move that emotion, that energy and
Mhm.
motion move through that and heal?
Mm. Yeah, so I think the first step is to identify it, which we were talking about the losses before. If you can name it, even sometimes saying it aloud, even if it's to yourself in front of a mirror, just the act of giving voice to something that has been hard for you, whatever, whether it's trauma, whether it's grief, whether it's something else in your life. Um, you know, we talk sometimes like if you name it, you can tame it.
Mhm.
I do believe that that is the first step. Um, and then if you're open to talking to another person about it, I think that can bring about such healing in that intersubjective space of having someone attend to your pain and understand where you're coming from. Even if, I teach interns and I always tell them, your pain stories won't ever line up exactly, but there is usually enough common ground that can bring about that shared mutuality. and can offer a step toward healing. And those are really, I think, sacred spaces that, you hold for people in your work. I try to do it in my work as well. So I would encourage people to try to find a professional, whether it's, a coach like yourself, whether it's a spiritual director, whether it's a therapist, whether it's a trusted friend, really try to find someone that can help hold your story with you. I do think it's helpful. Again, this is going to vary based on the individual, but I think it can be helpful to read other people's stories as well or hear other people talk. And that's why I love podcasts because they're so great because you get to hear other perspectives. And that can also help people to not feel alone when they
Yeah.
see themselves in the work. And that's why I do a lot of writing. And I'll even write about patient stories that come up in my work. Now I changed a lot of the identifying details, so I'm not violating HIPAA in any sort of way, but just the essence of the story, because I think that one person's story of suffering can actually speak to all of us, even if we've not gone through that particular context. The other piece I usually invite people to think about is to find a community for you where you can, be in this identity for yourself. So whether that's, an online support group, and, we're fortunate now there's, you know, I hear
So
there's like
many. Yeah.
Reddit threads for everything and
Yeah.
a lot of things that are online when everything used to be in person. So, that is one benefit right now to the day and age that we're living in. Or for some people, the community might be a faith community. For others, it may not be. Or it may even be, like your yoga studio that you go to, but finding other people so that you're not alone in what you're dealing with is also a great way to move through it. For people who are interested in becoming more intentional about their spirituality, I would also recommend looking at spiritual practices as a way of moving through things. Now, that's once you've done a lot of the processing work as well. You're not just doing spiritual practices and nothing else. But doing, I use a lot of different meditation techniques. Or for people that are like, that is not for me, I might say, okay, let's just work on going for a walk outside. Like that can be a spiritual practice. If you are attuned to what's going on around you, if you're feeling the sun on your face or the wind in your hair and listening to birdsong, that can be really transformational for people. And it just takes 5 minutes. It can help change their outlook, especially if that's something that they're continually doing over time. Or something like gratitude, which again, we're not doing gratitude at the exclusion of acknowledging our suffering, but we're doing gratitude even in the midst of our pain. What are the things that are giving me hope? What are the things that are going well right now? And again, that's research. That's not me. That can really help people to get through really trying times and focus on resilience.
Mm. So good. Such good tips. I'll add to that that I think something that's really powerful too is just when you can name it. And I say the same thing, like I always say awareness is the first step. You have to be aware because you
Mm-hmm.
can't change anything if you don't, or work through something if you don't actually know what it is. So naming it, that way you can actually process through it is the first step. But offering yourself compassion, and like so many
Yes.
people forget to actually
Mm-hmm.
like talk to yourself as if you're your best friend. Like if
Yep.
your best
Mm-hmm.
friend was going through the loss of their child or
Mm-hmm.
spouse or something, like,
Mm-hmm.
would you be like, oh, you should get over it? Like, we're still dealing with this
Mm-hmm.
like 5 years later. Why are you still thinking about this? Why are you? You
Mm-hmm.
would never in a million years would you ever say that. So like
Mm-hmm.
putting your hands over putting your hands on your body, actually touching yourself,
Oh, I
putting your
like
hands
that.
over your heart, allowing yourself to connect with your body and say like, wow, it makes sense like that you are so that you're feeling so upset about this right now because
Mm-hmm.
that memory just triggered memories of,
Mm-hmm.
so and so, or that person said that and it made you feel such and such a way, and it makes sense
Yeah.
that you're feeling that way. And um
there's a tenderness when you're viewing it outside of yourself that we don't often give to ourselves. Another variation on that question, because I use that same question too, but another variation I'll do with individuals who, have a strong relationship with God, or that's an important part of their life. I'll say, what would God say to you about this? And all the time, what God says to them and how they articulate it is full of grace, full of compassion,
Totally.
not the judgment that they're giving themselves.
So good. Yeah, and I think the community piece and like talking about it is so important because at our like primal, level, like we all just want to be seen, heard, and loved. And like to be in community with other people or be in a relationship that's supportive and honoring and helps you hold that grief, like it is so healing to be in those types of relationships. Christine, I could talk to you all day.
Likewise.
This has been so, so powerful. Thank you so much for sharing everything that you know about this subject. For the listener who, is curious, I know you said one or two times about your work and like your writing, like how can they get a hold of you? What can you help with outside of this podcast? And what is the best way to find you?
Yeah, so the best way would be on my website, which is my name, Christine, and then vdavies.com. And on there, you can contact me directly. You can follow me on any social media that you would like. I'm not as active on those. And I do have newsletters that you can sign up for, or you can just click through to the Substack and read all of the previous newsletters, articles that I'm writing about different spiritual practices, about different types of loss. If you're curious and you want to hear more about, okay, what are the losses? Or if you're looking for that grief guide, all of that is on there.
Awesome. So powerful. And I'll have all of those links in the show notes for you to reach out to her or read her Substack or anything like that. Thank you, Christine, so much for being here. I've been saying, like I said this spontaneously a couple months ago on my podcast, and it's just like really stuck. And I feel like I have to say it every time now because it really is the truth. I do this because this is not just a message. This is a movement. And healing is always possible. Thank you for listening. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with a friend and leave us a review so we can get the message out, get the movement out. Everyone needs to hear this. So thank you so much for being here, Christine.
Oh, it's such a joy to get to talk with you.
See you on the next episode.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for tuning in to Holistic Health with Melissa. It is such an honor to have you here. If you found value in today's episode, would you share it with a friend who might need it too and leave us a review? If you have questions or topic suggestions, reach out on social media or visit our website, holistichealthbymelissa.com, and take care. I'll catch you on the next episode.